Welcome to episode 53 of the Empowering Ability Podcast.
Welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast, where we get you and your loved ones impacted by disability the information needed to live a full and meaningful life. Now here's your host, Eric Gall.
Hey friends, thanks for joining for yet another episode of the Empowering Ability Podcast. I'm Eric Gall, your host, and today I am covering an exciting topic which I find quite interesting and I have had a fair amount of experience with over my lifetime, which is personal support networks. And we have a great guest on to talk about personal support networks who has a wealth of experience with them, and that is Rebecca Pauls. And Rebecca is the director of PLAN, or also known PLAN for short, but Planned Lifetime Advocacy Network, and they're located in Vancouver. And in this episode, Rebecca and I discuss what a personal support network is, what the purpose of a personal support network is, and we get into, what are the benefits of having one, what are the advantages, how to build a personal support network, and we talk about kind of PLAN's approach to personal support networks. And we also talk about a lot of the great stuff that PLAN is learning currently. So lots of great insights in this episode. Personal support networks can kind of be a bit of a fuzzy area for folks. They're called many different things. So you might have heard of a circle or a support circle or a microboard, which is becoming this terminology becoming more popular these days. So we will try to clarify and demystify all of those things for you today. Before I get into the intro with Rebecca, I just want to, again, remind you and make you aware that there is now the opportunity to contribute to this podcast and the blog by subscribing. And I recently sent out an email to people that have joined the mailing list. And you can join that mailing list by heading on over to empoweringability.org to get all the new episodes sent directly to your inbox. But recently sent out an email letting people know that there is the opportunity to subscribe. And I thank all of you that have subscribed so far. It's a great help to allow me to continue to invest in creating more content like this, but also creating content such as e-courses, templates, and worksheets to benefit you and your family or the work that you do. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of points that I mentioned in that email in terms of why you may want to consider subscribing to Empowering Ability. So the first reason is that, you've been listening and consuming this content and there's valuable insights that you've gained through the content. So it might have changed your understanding, your mindsets, your behavior, and ultimately the trajectory of your life or others, the lives of others. So really it's helped you to learn and to develop yourself. And by subscribing in this podcast, so in putting money out and monetarily contributing, you're investing in your own self, in your own learning, in your own development, because once you've paid for something, you've showed that you value it. And the things that you value are the things that you're going to do. So in other words, if you start paying for a subscription to Empowering Ability, you're going to be sure that you're going to read the blog or you're going to listen to the next podcast because it's something that you've paid for. You've invested in it and you want to get that return on that investment. So it's a way for you to continue to invest in yourself. So second reason you might want to consider investing in a subscription to Empowering Ability is that this is a medium that is for free and always will remain free. However, there is value in this medium. So, and you pay for other things like magazines or book subscriptions or other paid content in your life. So that is a reason to consider to pay for a subscription. So for example, you can go back and listen to the last 52 episodes of Empowering Ability, and you can see exactly the value you're going to get from it. Whereas those other mediums, such as a book or a magazine that you're purchasing, you're not really sure of the value that you're going to get from it. Some are a hit, some are a miss, but this is a known commodity. You know what you're going to get. And the value of a book or a magazine might cost you $15 or $30, just for one issue. And with each episode, I'm striving to deliver that much value. So it's another reason that you might want to consider investing in an Empowering Ability subscription. The third is that I'm continuing to develop more content, and there's a Empowering Ability members area that'll be coming in 2019. So any subscribers prior to the launch of that members area are going to get access to that members area for whatever contribution amount you've self-selected, whatever that amount feels right for you. So that members area, again, it's going to include things like e-courses, templates and worksheets, and I'm going to just start to dabble into video a little bit as well. So there'll be lots of great content there for subscribers in the members area. Whatever amount you decide to self-select to contribute will be honored for that members area, even if the members area subscription comes at a higher value. So there you have it. Some reasons that you might want to consider investing in a subscription to Empowering Ability. And lastly, if you're unable to contribute monetarily, just please don't. You can contribute by sharing these blogs and podcasts that you feel will benefit your networks. So I guess back to this episode. I just want to do a quick intro for Rebecca, and we'll get into it. So Rebecca, as you'll see, is an enthusiastic leader. She is a really creative facilitator in her work and has a range of experiences in community development and collaboration with people who have developmental disabilities. She's a mother to 4 children and has a deep appreciation for roles that family and friends play in our lives, and she's committed to connecting with people. As I mentioned, she's the director of Plan based in Vancouver, and she's really led a complete redesign of the programming at Plan to integrate principles of person-centered planning, asset-based community development, narrative therapy, and independent facilitation. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Rebecca Puls. Hey, Rebecca. Welcome to the Empowering Ability podcast.
Hi, Eric. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and excited to dive into a topic that I really believe in, and I've seen the fruit bared from it in my own life with personal support networks. But before we kind of dive into the topic, I would love you to just have the opportunity to share a little bit more about Plan, and maybe just a little bit of the backstory and the work that you do.
Sure. Thanks so much. Planned Lifetime Advocacy Network is a group of people with disabilities and their families. We're based here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we came together about 30 years ago. And life was really different for people with disabilities 30 years ago. And the group of parents who founded Plan all had sons and daughters who had disabilities, but they also believed that they could be contributing citizens. And they knew that just because they had a disability didn't mean that they shouldn't be included in the school system or shouldn't be able to make decisions or live in the heart of community. So the families came together to meet and ask what they as citizens could do to make a difference for their sons and daughters and for their families. And they haven't stopped since then. Really, the work of Plan is charting a new path that's full of opportunities for people with disabilities to contribute their gifts and to live connected with other people. And the really neat thing when we think back to that group of founding families, not only were they thinking about how they could change the present situation that they were dealing with, but thinking ahead to the future. And if they realized that they were going to work so hard to create a new way of being and being in community, they also thought ahead to ask that question, well, what happens when we're no longer here? What happens when we're gone? And that's where the idea of personal support networks really began to mobilize here in Vancouver.
Yeah. And that's a question that's on, I think, every parent's mind that has a son or a daughter with a developmental disability is what happens when I'm not here? And I think that, some fear can come up. I think about the perspective of my parents, and I think maybe for a while there was a mindset of, well, no one can do what I do, so no one else is going to do it type thing. But we won't get too much into that. But I'm curious, from your experience working with families that maybe are further down the journey where, parents are no longer providing that support, and that, that fear or that question actually happens. What has that looked like for families? So I'm curious if you're able to maybe share what you've seen for families that were unprepared, or they didn't have maybe a strong personal support network in place. What did that look like? And maybe even on the other side of things, where families did have that strong support network in place, and what has that looked like?
Well, I think the difference comes in the amount of unpaid relational support that people have in their lives. And when we're talking about personal support networks, really we're talking about having a group of friends and family who all commit to being intentionally involved in the life of the person at the center of the network. So what happens when there's not a personal support network involved is that a person with a disability or a person with support needs might live a life where they don't have friends, they don't have companionship, and have mostly paid people in their lives. Where when a personal support network is involved and the parents are no longer able to be involved because of reasons of sickness, maybe they've passed away, there's people in the person's life that can play important and specific roles. They can help them to make decisions, help them to realize their goals and their dreams for their own life. And that's become a important part of the work that we do at Plan. We have a team of mentors that help people to build and nurture their networks. We also do a lot of planning and advocacy, making sure that the goals, the dreams, and the needs of a person are met long before the situation comes when the parents are no longer involved.
Yeah, for sure. And where I'd like to explore further, and I think you astutely pointed this out earlier as we were talking before recording the podcast, is to talk about how to go build that personal support network, right? So how to go do it. I think it's great to, a lot of families are like, oh yeah, it sounds great. But then it's like, oh, well, how do we do that? So I want to talk about the how, but before we get there, maybe we could talk about the, almost like, I like to call it a mental model, but like a spectrum of different types of personal support networks. So did you want to maybe give your perspective on what those can look like, from maybe least formal to most formal?
I think that's a matter of how people are involved in each other's lives. When we're talking about personal support networks, we're talking about a group or a circle of support. So at different times in a person's life, they might depend on their network for different things. If they're a younger person or life's going well, they might spend time with their network doing more fun and social things. And at different points in life, when challenging situations happen or there's a need for planning and advocacy, those friends can come together in dialogue to work together to help the person get what they need. So in a formal sense, there's different iterations of personal support networks. Sometimes you hear it called natural supports or circles of support. And in other situations, people develop a microboard, or which is the most formal way of people setting up their personal support network. The most important thing is not in what you call it, it's in the way that people are working together. And I think that's important not only for people with disabilities, it's more like a way of being and a way of living our lives, that we commit to being involved in our communities and caring for each other and sharing about what's important to us, and then working together to get what we need.
Yeah. And I think one of the realizations that I've had is that we all have a personal support network, no matter if we have a disability or not. We all have that. When we're going through a tough time, we all have that one friend we're going to pick up and call them. Or, we have that one friend that, maybe we love doing a physical activity or a sport with. We have that person that we view as a mentor on, job advice or career advice. And where I've seen kind of that intentionality piece be important for individuals with a developmental disability, is around just the support to maintain and even deepen those relationships. That might be like they might have a need for some support to strengthen those relationships, and to maintain them. Does that resonate with you, Rebecca?
I agree with you. I think we all have networks of support, but I think it's sometimes difficult to build or maintain those, or difficult even in our own lives to reach out to others and share the challenges or share our aspirations. And for a lot of people that I know who have disabilities, they also appreciate support in building and nurturing their support network. So within the traditional plan model, there's a network member who takes the role of a community connector. We sometimes call that person a mentor as well. And their role in the network is to keep everyone connected, to help the person at the center of the network to reach out and share invitations to do things on the weekend, or to talk about what's important to them. There's no one way of setting up a support network. As many people as there are, and different stages of life and different lifestyles, the important thing to recognize is that you're living in community with a group of people and not alone. We realize that relationships are really the basis of living a good life, which is another really important aspect of plan. And when we talk about plan as an organization and how we've developed through the years, we can really say that we have two ultimate aims. And the first is that the people who are involved with plan can live a good life, which means that they have friends and relationships, that they're making a contribution in their community, that they're empowered to make choices, they have a place to call home and financial stability, but then also that the parents have peace of mind. And the basis of all of those things are having people and relationships to be able to do life together with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've kind of talked about what a personal support network is, the different kind of ways people might have heard about a personal support network, or they're called different things, and there's different levels of formality that come with those, and how that might shift or evolve over time. So I think traditionally, especially the support networks that I've been involved with, and they've been called circles of support, have been really around building and deepening relationships for that individual at the center of the circle. And I just want to talk for a minute around what the purpose of that personal support network can be. it doesn't necessarily have to be around relationships. Maybe anyways, the ones I've been a part of started out as, but I'm curious, can you talk to maybe the purpose of that personal support network and help ground us there?
I think the purpose of a personal support network is to ensure that no one is alone and that no one's stuck in isolation. Sometimes we hear the saying that loneliness is really the only debilitating disability. And so the purpose of the network on the most foundational level is to ensure that everybody can live in an inclusive and caring community. There's all kinds of things that people in a network can do together and to accomplish. But at the heart of it, it's recognizing that we have the support that we need to live the life that we want and that we dream of for ourselves.
Okay, so let's say that I'm someone listening to this podcast and I'm sold on the idea of a personal support network, and I understand that there's different ways that could look, and there's probably some figuring out on how intentional that needs to be right now for me. But aside from that, how does one go about building a personal support network?
When we're spending time with someone who's looking to build a personal support network, we start by getting to know who the person is. So what their gifts are, the things that they think a lot about, the things that they ask questions about, things that they like to do, things that they care about. Because none of us build relationships based on disabilities or deficiencies. We build relationships based on common interests, and we have friends who care about the same things that we do. So in the same way, when we're building a network, we focus on gifts and the uniqueness of each person. And then we'll ask questions like, who are the people in your life? And sometimes it's sitting down with a piece of paper and brainstorming all of the different people that the person has relationships with, whether or not they're connected with them now or not. Starting with that relationship map or that inventory is a good starting point. But then sometimes there's people who don't have a lot of friends or family or relationships to start with. So then we ask the question, well, if there were people in your life, what kinds of roles would you want them to play? And some people might say, I would like someone to spend time with in the community, or they might have a more specific need in that I need someone to help me to manage my finances. Different roles of people can be anything, but having that as a starting point is helpful. And then we look to the community. We believe that our communities are full of welcoming places and other people with gifts. So when we're looking to build connections, we look around in the person's neighborhood for groups and associations that are already in place, for other neighbors, for the natural connections that the person have. And then the role of the community connectors to create opportunities for the person to get connected. So it's showing up at a lot of the same places, spending time in the parks or walking through the neighborhood. Sometimes people come to us and say, I'd like to make more friends, but I don't see people. I don't know where to start. And the more we learn about the person's situation, they're getting driven everywhere by a support worker. They're not spending any time in their neighborhood or in community places. And if you're not where people are, there's not as much opportunity to get connected or to build relationships. And turning those relationships into a network is a matter of talking about what's important. And so as much as possible, we encourage people to share what it is that is important in their life right now and what's going on in their life. And I think that we all want to help and we all want to be involved in each other's lives, but sometimes we don't know how to go about that, or we don't have the confidence to reach out and say, hey, how are you doing? And how can I help? And so when we're spending time with people, building networks, sometimes it's easier or helpful to have a community connector who can bridge that gap and just create opportunities for people together.
And that community connector role, who would fill that role? Is it typically a friend or family or paid support, or what is that? What does that typically look like?
Again, that's different in every person's situation. Sometimes there's a natural connector in the person's life, and the family can say, hey, can you make sure you include this person when you and the group of friends are going out on the weekend? It could be as casual as that. Or there are some groups and organizations, like Plan being one of them, that has a team of community connectors that families can hire to play that particular role. Okay. There's often other organizations and some support organizations who train their personal support network or their personal support workers to have a more network-based approach. So when they're spending time with the person or providing support to them, they're asking the questions like, who else can be involved, and how can we involve the person's family and the person's friends in this? So there's lots of different ways that somebody can have a community connector. But the most important thing is that they're focused on the gifts and the abundance in community and connecting and making plans for that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So starting off by really understanding the person, getting to know them, looking at who's in their life, what relationships do they have, maybe using a tool like a relationship map. And, within getting to know them, I missed kind of looking at their gifts, taking a strength-based approach. What are they interested in? And then, who's in their life, looking at what community groups or associations exist that they can explore those interests, explore those gifts, contribute, and that community connector role, doing that, helping them find those opportunities and to be where people are, so that there's an opportunity to create relationships. Is that a good summary of how to start?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. And the one piece that I'll add to that is that personal support networks typically come together every month or every other month to do some planning and to talk about what the priorities are for that month and how they can support each other.
Right. And so when you come together in that meeting, would there be a agenda to the meeting? How structured would it be? Does it vary? I'm just curious, what do you see those monthly meetings or bi-monthly meetings look like?
Sure. So some of them are very structured and some of them are very natural. And as a community connector or mentor, and as a member of that person's network, we plan based on what that person's more comfortable with. And I think in all of our work, it's based on what the current needs and priorities are. And so here at Plan, we create work plans. And so every 6 months, we would have a meeting with the person and their family and their network if possible and talk about, okay, for the next 6 months, what is it that we want to do together? Do we plan some events and some celebrations? Maybe we'll work on helping the person to look for job opportunities or look for a new apartment. Again, it's really depending on where the person's at in their life. And right. It can be completely flexible.
Right. So you use that 6 month kind of check-in to look at what's maybe the most important focus for the personal support network over the next 6 months. And then you're kind of continuously reevaluating and adjusting based on that person's interests and needs and lifestyle and taking those things into consideration.
Yes, within our plan model, we do that every 6 months. And then each month, the community connector would send a written update to the person and their family and network just to talk about the progress that's made, or sometimes things change or something new comes up. But there's a high level of communication and engagement that happens.
Cool. So if I'm someone listening to this and say, okay, I'm starting to understand the nuts and bolts of how this works, or at least, how Plan is supporting families with personal support networks. Can you share a little bit more in terms of, or is there more to share in terms of how this works for families? So like, what does it look like when it's actually up and running for an individual? And maybe that looks differently, but maybe there's a story that comes to mind, or a couple of different examples. What comes to mind for you?
I can think of a lot of examples about ways that a person's network plays a key role in their life. And some of the ones that come to mind first are the situations here at Plan where the parents have already passed away, and the personal support network is functioning in those important and specific roles for the person. And what that looks like is that where a mom or a dad or a family member was once the key supporter in decision making, now it's a network member, where here in BC we have something called a representation agreement. And that means that it's a shared decision-making process. So there's some formal roles that network members can be a part of to help that person make decisions. And I think another key piece is when it comes to financial security, the personal support network can also advise the trustee, or actually act in the role of a trustee, in order to help the person at the center of the network or our lifetime members to access the trust that their parents have left in their will, and use that money and those resources to continue to build their good life in community. Mm-hmm. I think also that ongoing companionship and being part of a group, that sometimes parents worry that their son or daughter will be alone or not be included. And the benefits of creating a personal support network is there's that commitment to be involved in not only the person's life, but the lives of each other. They're a group of friends who are committed to each other and highly involved and engaged.
From that example, right, it's pretty obvious the benefits that a personal support network has from not only a relationship, a friendship perspective, but also kind of the, if you want to call it natural supports, or support for when mom and dad aren't there anymore. I guess the question that comes to mind for me is, when should you think about being more intentional about that personal support network? The answer that comes to mind for me is like as soon as possible. Like the longer that there's intentionality and thinking in place around it, the better. But I'm curious on your perspective.
I would probably have the same answer as you, in that as soon as possible, or whenever it feels like the right time. And I'd encourage families not to get caught up in the idea of a network, which might seem like more work to bring people together for meetings, to have too much formality about it, and just really remember that the heart of personal support networks is having a group of caring friends and relationships. So some of the families that I'm involved with have little ones and toddlers. They're 2 and 3 years old, and already they're beginning to think about, okay, who are the people in our lives who journey with us through the fun times and through the challenging times. So in the case of a younger person, maybe that's when the network might not be as formal, but just this idea of interdependence, and this idea that we each have gifts and contributions that we can make to each other is the most important thing that I think people and families can remember when they're thinking about personal support networks.
So Rebecca, if there's an individual or a family listening to our conversation and they're thinking, this sounds great. I have an idea of how to start it. I'm not sure if I can do this myself or if I should go out and start to try and do this myself because I've never done it. I don't know if I'm doing it right. Should somebody start it on their own? Should they hire some support to help them? Like, I know this is what Plan does, but what are your thoughts on that? Whether the family lives in British Columbia, which is where Plan is located, or they live, in the United States or India or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would say that starting to think about how a network can be involved in their son or daughter's life is a good first stage. And there's a lot of resources and stories available both online and in print. Plan has a resource called Safe and Secure, which talks about the personal support network and several of the ways that friends and relationships can be involved in a person's life. But there's also lots of ways that outside of Plan and outside of the Vancouver, British Columbia area that people are building networks. Some families do choose to build the network on their own. And sometimes it's another support worker or just a family friend that they hire independently into that role. And we have an online course that's called Personal Support Network Facilitation. And it's a 6-week course that's self-paced that a lot of people in roles, either formal roles like a support worker, an independent facilitator, or family roles, take the online course to really dig in and talk about the different practices and habits of a facilitator or someone who's working to build a network. I think there's also, as we reach a time when there's a real generational shift happening, and for the first time in history, the parents that have created Plan and really created community inclusion all across our country are now, for the first time, getting to the point where they're 70 and 80 and 90 years old, and the rubber's really hitting the road. So in terms of building networks, we're starting to see all kinds of groups asking that question: how can we help make sure that people have an intentional support circle in their life other than mom or dad or the nuclear family? And so a lot of community living organizations are reaching out to Plan, and I currently have 2 or 3 different projects that I'm working on both in Canada and the States, where we're building capacity for all kinds of disability organizations to really think about bringing people in, building networks, organizing community around the person. And those projects are a combination of the online course and ongoing mentoring and support, because this is not easy work. And sometimes we talk about building networks as being a little bit countercultural, because in all of our lives, we're getting busier and people are living more isolated lives. They don't know their neighbors as much as we used to. So the conversations and the training and the resources, we're starting to really focus on that a lot more.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. The countercultural piece, right? I mean, maybe in 5 years, we need to seriously start thinking about everybody having an intentional personal support network, right? Like we get to that point. Or maybe we're already past that point. We just haven't realized it. But that's probably a whole different thread of a conversation or a rabbit hole we could go down. I guess in terms of the resources, so Safe and Secure and the online course, is there a URL you can share where people can go access those?
Sure. Our website is www.plan.ca. We have a blog with stories on it. Plan Institute, which is our sister organization, also has several online courses and resources, and their website is planinstitute.ca.
Okay, perfect. So I'll link to both of those in the blog and in the show notes so people can access those. So throughout Plan's history, I mean, I know that there's definitely been a lot of things tried and a lot of lessons learned. So I'm curious, how is that culminating in the work that you're doing now?
Sure, that's a really good question, and there's a lot of learning and shifting that's happening for us, and we talked about it a little bit already. But personal support networks can play many key roles, and here at Plan, within our families, as we talk about it and check in with families, we recognize that we've done a really good job helping to make sure that everyone has friends and everyone has relationships. Also, that people are able to contribute in their community and share their gifts. So that accomplishes one of our key aims, which is making sure that people with disabilities live a good life. But parents are still asking that question, what happens when I'm gone? And they're asking that question with more urgency than ever. And so we've really been asking ourselves the questions and working together as family groups, saying, okay, we all have networks, but now how do we put those networks to work? So how do we identify what the key roles are for the time when mom and dad aren't able to continue? And what's that succession plan, or what's that process of inviting network members, whether they be sisters or brothers, or family members, or key friends, people who have been part of the network for several years? How do we start to transfer that knowledge that the parents and the family have to this next generation of people that are going to continue to support? So we're almost treating our planning now like succession planning for an organization, like when an executive director leaves, or a key role in the organization, and what do we need to know, and how do we start to pass that along, and make sure that all of the roles like trustee or guardian or power of attorney, or practical things like who's going to help this person go to the bank, or a lot of parents are still extremely involved in helping people to get to various places by driving and providing transportation, because a lot of our cities, there's still not adequate transportation for people with disabilities, or providing food, and every little thing that we do for each other as families. We're now starting to mobilize networks to become more involved in those aspects. So really passing the baton from mom and dad to other people before we reach a crisis point, or before we reach that moment, kind of doing some proactive planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I've kind of had a little peek under the hood at some of the work that you're working on. And there's some different, if we want to call them domains or areas that we've already spoke about, that that personal support networks look at, and there's kind of a scale that you've put together. Are you comfortable talking to that, or is that something that we want to keep under wraps until?
No, I'd love to share a bit more.
Okay,
Thank you.
So so it goes from kind of peace of mind on the far end of the scale to like the most prepared end of the scale to unprepared. So I'll kind of hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you for that little introduction. It's a good one. And yes, we have created a new planning tool, because as an organization, we're wanting to make sure that we're doing what we say we do and make sure that we're making an impact. And so one of the questions is, well, do families have peace of mind? And peace of mind is dynamic and it changes. And there's so many factors that contribute to our peace of mind. So as a group, we had to ask ourselves that question, well, how do we know when we have peace of mind, and how do we know what else we need to do to get there? So we started with each of the elements of a good life that we've talked about several times throughout the podcast: friends and family, decision-making, financial security. And then we asked the question, well, what does it look like when our life includes friends and family? Or what does it look like if I'm empowered to make decisions? And underneath each of the categories identified things like, when our life includes friends and family, it means that there's an active support network in place, that the members of the support network are active, involved, and engaged, that the network members provide practical support. So since we talked about personal support networks looking so different for everyone, it was important for us to identify those universal aspects of how we provide relational support, how we intentionally support the person. And so now in the planning meetings that we do with families, we're going through each of the elements of a good life and each of the different outcome statements. And we're asking families that question: does your network provide practical support? Are your friends and family actively engaged? And what we find is that people and families are at a stage in the planning process. They're either completely unprepared and they haven't started to do work in that area, or they have peace of mind and feel okay. But in between those two factors, there's also several other stages. So we've found that people move from being unprepared to becoming aware of something that needs to get done or thought about. And then they learn about it. So the third stage is learning. They learn about a discretionary trust, or they learn about some formal supports that are in place. And then they do the work. So they write their will with a lawyer, or they help their son or daughter find a new place to live. But even once that work is done, sometimes families don't feel that sense of peace of mind. So we've really starting to understand the importance of intentional meetings where parents and networks are coming together and reviewing the plans. So an example of that might be a parent identifies another of their sons and daughters to be the trustee or to be the executor of their will. But until they have a chance to sit down with that other person and talk about what that looks like and review the details, there's probably still going to be some worry or some unclarity there. So what families are finding is when they're able to have conversations about how do we support this person in making decisions, what amount of money will be available, and how can we imagine it being spent, or talking with the network about potential transitions that might take place in where the person lives. That reviewing stage is really key to feeling peace of mind. And we talked about how that changes. So reviewing on an ongoing basis is important. So the way that this planning framework works is that every 6 months we'll be reviewing each of the areas of a good life with families and networks. And once they've reviewed it, if everything's good, then they'll have peace of mind. Or maybe something needs to be changed. Maybe a signing authority at the bank needs to be updated. Then they'll go back and do the work, review it again, and have peace of mind. So because things are so different in each of our lives and for each of our families, we're really looking for a way or a bit of a guide for us as mentors and connectors to really develop work plans that are going to make a difference, to show us where we need to invite the network members into important and specific roles, and then create work plans that are going to help people to maintain the good life that families have helped them to create, and that parents can feel okay knowing that when they're no longer here, that their son or daughter going to continue to be surrounded by the loving care of their friends and family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's helpful to share where your thinking is at, because or your organization's thinking is at, because this is, work that you live and breathe and has been done over a long period of time. So for families that are just thinking about starting a personal support network, or families that have been doing or have had an intentional personal support network in place for a long time, it's important to think about, maybe thinking about where I might be on this, between unprepared and peace of mind. Like, maybe we do need to review X, or maybe this conversation triggered something on, I wasn't aware of that. Now I'm aware of it. I need to go learn about it, right? And to put something in place. So I think that was definitely helpful. Rebecca, is there any maybe final thoughts or final topics or a message that you wanted to leave the listeners with today?
Well, I sure appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, Eric, and to try and articulate some of these big ideas and the concepts that we're thinking about and working on here at Plan. I guess my final message to people and families is to really remember that personal support networks are about relationships, and they're about living intentionally together and supporting each other, sharing what's important to us. I think throughout the history of our work and our sector, personal support network is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. And for us and for me personally, because of all of the changes that we see happening in families, and like I talked about, people sadly passing away, I think there's a real urgency for us to begin asking that question. Okay, what does this really look like? And are we intentionally supporting each other? Do we know people who don't have any relationships, and asking ourselves what we can do? Because I think there's all kinds of possibilities to connect. We just need to go after them and have the confidence or the boldness to say, hey, how can I help you? Or this is what I have, or this is what I need. We just really envision this world where we're all working together just a little bit closer.
I love that. That is a perfect note to wrap up our conversation today, Rebecca. So thank you so much for taking the time. Super grateful for you coming on the podcast today.
You're welcome. Thanks so much, Eric.
A big thank you goes out to Rebecca for joining me on this episode and for helping to shed light on what personal support networks are and the benefits they have in our lives, and how we can go about building them and utilizing them and running them in our lives. So I think one of the things that's helped me as I've thought about personal support networks is the range of formality and intentionality that exists with personal support networks. And the more I've thought about this, I've created a mental model that I want to share with you, which Rebecca noted in our conversation, which was, if you think about a scale, and on the right side of that, or on the left side of that scale, you kind of have your immediate family. And on the far left side of that scale, you have a self-directed support organization. A microboard would fit into that category. And then in between, you have what would be referred to as a lot of people refer to it as a support circle, ranging from, on closer to the family side of this range, less formal, you would have your kind of social support circle. So a support circle focused on social, which would be a little bit maybe less informal. And then as you start to creep up towards the microboard side, or the self-directed support organization side, then it becomes more formal. So the purpose of it might be focused around creating a home, or the purpose of it might be around creating job opportunities, or it might be full out, parents are aging and people are assuming more intentional roles, such as guardian or financier, or not financier, but treasurer in that individual's life, to helping to manage finances. So I like to think about it also in terms of formality, and that helps to get an idea of the different types of support networks that exist when looking at it from a perspective of formality. So I just wanted to provide that to you, the listener, to help to give you that perspective as well, and to think about at the stage of life that you're at, or the person with a disabilities at that is being supported, what type of formality and what type of structure for a personal support network makes the most sense at this time in the individual's life. And as Rebecca shared, that will shift and change over a person's life depending on what the environment is, what the circumstances are, and what the person wants in their life. So there's some more food for thought, and hopefully providing a bit more clarity for you on personal support networks. As we wrap up this podcast today, I just want to thank you for listening, and I wanted to remind you that there is the opportunity to subscribe to the podcast, and you can do that by going to empoweringability.org/subscribe. And you can self-select the amount that you would like to invest into the podcast and into yourself, and into all the benefits and perks that are coming next year in 2019. And thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. If you like this episode and you think you know someone that would benefit, please share it with them. Be a part of the change to think differently about disability.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Visit us at empoweringability.org for more podcasts and resources to help you and your loved ones impacted by disability build a full and meaningful life.